All right, while you guys are finishing up with the photo or the recording releases, why don't we start with our first activity. This is going to be a get to know you activity for me. You guys have been together for a while already, but I would like to ask your help with helping me to get to know your names a little bit. I guarantee nothing that I will be able to remember everybody's name by the end of the semester, but I'm going to do my best. So in groups of 3 to 4, I would like you guys to pick a spokesperson. If nobody wants to volunteer, whoever's birthday is closest to today can be the designated speaker. Then I want the spokesperson to gather information about everybody in the group. So I want you to introduce your group to me by their first name, and then maybe a 10-second fun fact about them that you think will help me to remember their name. And then collectively in the group, I'd like you to come up with 2 or 3 words that are the first thing that you think of that comes to mind when you hear the term mental illness. And then we're going to do something with that information as well. So any questions about that? We're going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to do that. All right? Starting now. Are you guys ready to go? All right. So introduce your group, names and fun facts, and then share what terms. Second. And as we're going around and sharing terms, it's okay to duplicate.
No,
Oh, do you? Well, then you wouldn't be able to hear me.
So this is Sarah. She is starting a yoga teacher training class soon. This is Farah, and she owns 4 calendars. She likes to stay on top of things. I'm Melissa. Today's my birthday, and nobody believes me when I say I'm 26. And this is Faith. She grew up in Mexico. She knows Spanish. Brittany over here, she was born in the wrong hospital. Her mom planned to have her at a certain hospital, but the hospital was on strike the day she was born.
Wow. Good fun fact.
Joanna over here, she loves to lift. Lift weights.
Awesome. Wonderful. Nice to meet you guys. And your turn.
When we were talking about mental illness, we decided the first words that come to mind are stigma, anxiety, and common. It's really common.
All right.
But not a lot of people talk about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. So again, if you have the same words in your group, it's okay to repeat them. All right.
On my left, we have Elvin.
Elvin. A pug? Awesome. I love pugs.
She's a dog person. I'm
Daniel. I will remember that one. What was your name again? Janelle. Okay. Lots of hula there. Nice. Okay, and your words?
So the words that we came up with was depression, addiction, and stigma.
All right, good. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so this is Jennifer. She has 3 dogs. I'm Catherine. I'm the only child, and Noah, he has 2 vintage Volkswagens. And we think of stress, delusions, and scary when we think of mental illness.
Thank you. Oops, scared. Thank you. Nice to meet you guys.
This is Crete. Her background is she's very red/pink today. Stand up.
Pink.
This is Ann. A way to remember her name is Turn the Light On. Her background is that she is our class IT. She always talks about My name is Lindsay, and I love coffee.
Good.
So 3 words that we came up with is asylum, underrated, and taboo.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So to my
bucks,
pride
Brian.
is Mary Nell, and she said that her fun fact is that food is her only source of dopamine. So
We're going to be talking about dopamine today. Awesome.
and then all the way to my far right is Eliza, and she used to work at a bakery,
Bakery.
but she doesn't know how to bake.
Oh, it's probably
And
safest.
I'm Sophia, and my fun fact is that I work for a special needs camp that serves both the adult and pediatric population.
Great.
And some terms, some words that we hear, that we think of when we hear the word mental illness is depression, undiagnosed, anxiety, unseen, and unheard.
Thank you. Next.
Hi.
Hi.
So over here, I got Maria. She's going to Seattle today. That's her
Ooh, nice.
Travel. Christina to my right. She's born in Mexico. And then I got Alice to my right, who's born in China. I'm Sabrina, and my fun fact is that I work in a psych hospital, and our 3 words are misunderstood, stressful, and derivative, because it comes usually close to something.
Good. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back to semester 5. To my left is Laura. She got married recently.
Pictures.
And to my right is Rania. She started taking a kickboxing class, so don't mess with her. And my name is Daniel. I was born and raised in Nepal, so that's my father. And the 3 words we came up with were depression, wellness, and weakness.
What was the second one?
Wellness.
Wellness. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Hello. To her right, this is Tao, and her fun fact is that she has never left the country. This is Mary Chris, and her fun fact is that her first name is a combination of her parents' first names. This is Jessica, and she has a twin brother. And this is Tina, and her fun fact is she was named after a movie her mom watched while her mother was in labor. And I'm Janessa, and I've been playing piano since I was 6.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Did you guys have some words?
Our words were anxiety, depression, and unnoticed.
Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So this is Chanel. She likes bread. And over here we have Adeline, and she likes to play with a 5-month-old Chihuahua Yorkie.
Aww.
And my name's Elizabeth. I have a 1-year-old pit bull mix named Creed. And some words we thought of were therapy, depression, and anxiety.
Great. Thank you. Next.
Hello, to my right grader is Kat, and she just recently got bangs.
Oh, they're very cute.
And then to my right here is Maria, and she likes potatoes. And then my name is Isaac, and I like green tea. And then our 3 words are brain, complicated, and misunderstood.
Great. Thank you.
Hello. So to my far left, we have James, and the fun fact about him is that he grew up in Guam. To my closest left is Lynn. Fun fact about her is that she went horseback riding twice this month. And my name is Jim, and fun fact about me is that I'm addicted to caffeine. The 3 words we've chosen were stigma, uninformed,
Thank you.
To my right is Patrick Reed. He's driven through every state in the United States except for Hawaii and Alaska.
Nice.
This
I
is
love
Ron
road trips.
Chan. He's one of the oldest members in the cohort. And he likes to shoot archery. And my name is Hilario, and I work at Panic Express on campus. Come through. And the words that we came up with were brain, suicide, and then that one Logic song, the 1-800 song, that talks about suicide.
Oh, okay. Suicide hotline. Okay. And the first one I missed?
Brain.
Brain. Okay. Good. Thank you. See you at Panda Express.
Okay, in that act we have Wandi. His fun fact was he was a lawyer in Ethiopia.
Nice.
And then we have Ron right here. His fun fact was he was born in Texas. And then my name is Josh. My fun fact is I traveled to Malaysia over the winter break.
Nice. Great.
All our 3 words.
Your
Or
3
not 3, but our words are stigma and then untreated.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, to my left is Annie. She went to Japan over winter break. To my right is Donna. She has a beta fish named Kevin Nguyen. And my name is Lisa, and my fun fact is I can put my foot behind my head.
Wow.
The 3 words that we came up with is bipolar, misunderstood, and debilitating.
3 people got to my left is Sabrina, and she just finished my CMT, and she loves boba. To my left is Kelly. She's a crazy cat lady, and she loves boba. My name is Carlos, and I'm named after alcoholic drinks, and I kind of like boba. And our 3 words are stigma, misunderstood, and undiagnosed.
My daughter also loves boba. Next.
Okay, so my name's Bao, and
Let's see. Where are you, Bao? Okay.
right here, yes. I was born on December 25th in the Philippines, but I'm actually Vietnamese. So on my right side, I have Vivian. She likes to make scrunchies and start business about it. And here we have Sabir. He likes to study.
Good quality to have, for sure. Hi, Severe.
And over here we have Andrew, and he likes to make computers.
Oh, okay.
And 3 words that we pick out were depression, stress, and misconceptions.
All right.
Hi. To my far right is Jenny. One of her fun facts is she likes to play pool. And on my right is Minar. Her daughter was born at the same hospital as she was, and she has the same pediatrician.
Oh, nice.
On my left is Vic. He likes to lift. And to my far left is Jamaica. She tore her ACL playing Juno last month.
Sorry about that. Darn.
And my name is Tiago. I won the lottery to immigrate to the United States with my family.
Very cool.
And our 3 words are invisible pain, anxiety, and stigma. Yeah.
Thank you, Stigma. Is that everybody?
Just 2 more.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sim, and to my right is Laura. And over the break, she went to Hong Kong for her first time. And the fun fact about me is I like to design. And 3 words that we came up with were depression, anxiety, and stress.
Great. All right. Would one of you mind bringing the microphone down here while I create our word cloud to see what our general impressions are of mental illness as a group? All right, let's see if we can make this bigger. Thank you. All right, so maybe I can just take an image of it, make it larger. All right, can we see this at all? Okay, so it looks like some of the most common terms that came to mind were anxiety, depression, stigma, and misunderstood, and you can see some of the others around the borders. What are your overall impressions about what connotation these terms have? Generally negative, and that's not anything to beat ourselves up about, but it is something to be aware of, because if we as healthcare professionals have these negative connotations about mental illness, what do you think that has the ability? How do you think it has the ability to impact the care we give? Right. Yes. Definitely, so we can convey our biases to our patients, just like we might about anything else. Like if we're talking to them about some sort of sexually transmitted infection or something, you wouldn't want to make them feel bad about it. You just want to get them unbiased care so that they can learn and maybe prevent it in the future. So that's also something to keep in mind with regard to mental illness. So one of the things, or one of many things we want to do this semester is to learn to understand the origins of mental illness, ways to possibly prevent it or reduce its impact, and to hopefully at the end of all this have some hope that there is some light at the end of the tunnel for people with mental illness. It's not all doom and gloom. Everybody's not homeless and poor and miserable. Mental illness is a part of life that some of us have already been touched by. But let's do one next activity to kind of give some perspective on mental illness in the general population. So I would like everybody from here to this side of the room to stand just for a few minutes. This side of the room to stand. So the people who are standing or the people who are sitting, out of all of you, you have either already experienced, you have yet to experience, or are currently experiencing a mental illness yourself. And then, you guys can sit down now, and then if you think about all the people in your life, your friends, your family members, acquaintances, people you work with, when you add all of those people into the mix, there's no way that any of us is going through life without knowing somebody with a mental illness or dealing with that in some way. So that's one of the things that I think, that was one of the drivers in me wanting to have you guys work on this case study project, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But I was inspired by a documentary I watched about Harvey Milk. Do you guys know who Harvey Milk is? Anybody? What do you know about him?
I don't know if he was like mayor of Castro Valley over there. I saw the movie with Sean Penn that he was in, and it just really
He was the first first openly gay city council member in San Francisco. He was assassinated. But one of the reasons that he wanted to encourage people who were gay, lesbian, bisexual to come out to their friends and family members was because he thought that if people knew that their brothers and sisters and their children, friends, neighbors were gay, then they wouldn't hold this stigma against them. And so I thought the more that you learn about the people that you love who might be dealing with a mental illness, the more empathy that you're gonna have and the more prepared you're gonna be to work with your patients who have those illnesses and to have empathy for them. So now I'm gonna go to our course site and talk about what we're gonna be working on this semester. So in the announcements, if you haven't seen this yet, I've posted our dates for mandatory class meetings, so you're all here now. And then on February 14th is going to be our next mandatory session. That's the Hearing Voices simulation. I'll tell you about that and what that entails and what your instructions are in this of it, but just note that you'll need to be here on February 14th for that. Then our exam dates, 2/28 for exam 1, 4/10 for exam 2, the HESI on 5/8, and the finals exam schedule hasn't been posted yet, but I will update you on that as soon as I get it. And then on May 1st, we're going to do the last part of our case study project where you're all gonna present about the patient or the person that you worked with as a subject. And again, I'll give you more details about that. And then just one last reminder, in week 2, next week, I have a conference. I'll be in Florida. So everything's been recorded for you in modules. So you can go into the modules, and there is a documentary with John Nash. It's called A Beautiful Madness. It's a PBS documentary. He was a Nobel Prize winner who had schizophrenia. So that is split up into 4 parts. Then the second link here, there is a short video of a woman named Bethany Yeiser. She's someone who also has schizophrenia, and she recovered from her illness. I'd like you to watch the video of her talking about her treatment and kind of the turning point in her recovery. And then the last part is my video lecture, and there are some embedded quizzes in there, just a couple of questions per each section. But you go through that, and between all of it, even though they're divided into short videos, it looks like a lot. It doesn't add up to any more than the regular class time. You don't come to psych mental health next week at all. You get to sleep in. So I'll just point out this My Media site link. We are pilot testing how to get the videos to you guys. There still will be a link to a page on the San Jose State website where you can go to and rewatch the lecture videos. But we're going to also be trying to embed them into the course using My Media site. Now, anticipating that there could be some problems, that's why we're doing both ways, but I will be working to get the videos of the course uploaded here. And then I'll just post an announcement, look out for the announcements, but you can always go to the website for those recordings. So you can find the syllabus under the syllabus tab. I will enlarge this. So on the first page, you've got my contact information. I've listed some office hours, but it's really best to just make an appointment with me. I know you guys have class all day on Fridays, so just let me know what your availability is. If you give me, excuse me, if you give me a couple of days and a range of times, I can usually work around any meetings. I will update the link for this website as soon as I get it from Terry about where you can get the recordings. You can review this information like the course learning objectives on your own in the syllabus. The textbook is listed here. It's Boyd, Psychiatric Nursing, Contemporary Practice. You'll also want to get the additional materials because there will be course point prep you quizzes. There are a few websites here for interest if you would like to check into any of those. Your grade will be dependent upon your performance in the exams, the 2 midterms and the final. You have the opportunity to get some credit for your reading content, reinforcing that by doing the prep you quizzes. The HESI exam, as well as the case study project, which is a pretty large chunk of the grade. So if you work hard on that, you can definitely boost your overall grade. So for the exams, we're going to do them in class, on Canvas, so bring your laptop with you, and just note that they're going to be closed note exams, so when you come in, you put everything on the floor, except your laptop. It will be conducted using the lockdown browser also. So make sure your laptop is working with all of those applications. For the course point quizzes, the mastery level, I see a typo there, is set at 4. So you can take the quizzes as often as you like to get to the mastery level, or if you're feeling pretty confident with your test scores and everything, you might not worry too much about PrepU, but it's just to kind of reinforce what you're learning in the reading. Some things you will get will overlap between lecture and reading. Some things you'll just get from the reading, some things you'll just get in lecture. For the most part, the exams, you can use the learning objectives that I give you in class to study from, and then for PrepU, that will all be coming from the book. So the case study project has more detailed instructions in Canvas, and I'll point that out to you. But just to give you a brief overview, step 1 is to pick a subject, somebody that you know well. A family member or friend is the best choice, and if you don't know anybody off the top of your head, ask a parent or a grandparent. They usually know somebody right away who maybe you didn't realize. But if you don't have anybody or you don't feel comfortable talking to that person about it, or maybe they're not in a place to do so, then a client in clinical can be an option. Just you have to do it within the time that you're in clinical. You can't go after clinical's over when your instructor's not there. So in Canvas, you'll see a list of potential questions you can ask. Those are just a starting point. You can move on from there. But the goal for that will be to conduct a life history interview, see how the trajectory of their illness and recovery, if applicable, was. Construct a genogram of mental illness back through their grandparents, and then a timeline of their illness and recovery. And there's a sample in Canvas that you can use to get you started. The second step of the project is to use the library's databases. You can just stick to PubMed or CINAHL if you like, and search for literature that demonstrates best practices for the management of their illness. So in your life history interview, you might have found that they got X, Y, and Z treatment, and then in your review of the literature, realized that this whole other set of treatments is recommended that they didn't get. So you will be attentive to that. Then in step 3 of the project, you will investigate community resources for their illness or their condition. You will see what's available. You'll ask them what they've used, what they might like to use that didn't have access to, and make a list of those resources and talk about what the adequacy of them was. In step 4, you're going to see what the media representation of that illness or disorder is. So you can watch a movie, a documentary, or read a first-person account of a person who lived with the same or a similar condition. I would just advise that you don't watch something that's totally fiction or a horror movie or something like that. Something based on a real person's life. And then finally, Step 5, we're going to all come to class on May 1st, and we're going to have a roundtable session. So you're going to get in small groups, and you're going to bring your genogram and your timeline, and you're going to talk about what were the top 3 takeaway things that you learned in doing the project, and share with each other. That's an opportunity for us to share with people, you know, if you've done someone with an eating disorder and you've done somebody with schizophrenia, then you can share what you learned with each other. And then for each of those, you're gonna write a short journal, usually 1 to 1.5 type double-spaced pages, just to kind of process what you've learned. It doesn't have to be anything really formalized. You can sit there in free form while you're processing what you learned in doing the activity. The grading criteria is here. I think this is standard School of Nursing. And just want to point out the link to university policies is here. Make sure that if you haven't visited this page before, that you familiarize yourself with the policies on academic integrity, accommodations, dropping and adding courses, etc. They're all at that link. And then finally, the last page is our schedule of topics. The ones in bold are the days that I mentioned that are mandatory to be present in class. And you can see the deadlines for the case study project in the second to last column. All right. Any questions about anything? All right. Guys have it covered. All right, and then there's just one more thing I want to do before we get into the lecture content. Oh, I did need to talk to you guys about the Hearing Voices workshop. So the Hearing Voices, Lippincott, and that's in the course, that's right here? Okay, so I will check with the publisher and see about that. So this class code didn't work for you. Okay. So I'll post an announcement later after I check on that. Get it corrected. All right. So week 4, the Hearing Voices simulation. So the first page here gives all the instructions for the workshop, and then it asks you to sign a consent or acknowledge a consent, and then there's an evaluation for after the workshop is done. So there are 3 parts to the workshop. It starts with a series of videos. The woman in the video that you see her here, she's a psychologist named Dr. Patricia Deegan. She also has schizophrenia. She developed this workshop to help professionals, either in law enforcement, healthcare, to understand what it's like for people to hear voices. And so the first part, she gives a lecture talking about research in that area, what the personal experience was for her, and lots of other really interesting details, as well as kind of preparing you for the experience that you're going to have. So that's split into 3 parts. The second part of the activity takes place on campus. So you guys will come to campus. We're going to have it on a class day, but because we have to do it in smaller groups, we're going to split you into 2 groups, with half of you coming, unfortunately, at 7 o'clock, and then the other half coming at 8, and then we're going to come together at the end to have one big group discussion. So what I've done under the people page is to set up a group under Hearing Voices Simulation. So you can go in here and self-select into one of these 2 groups. And I ask that if you can at all manage to come at 7, it's not a hardship for you to please select into that group, because for some people, they might be coming from very far away, they might have family responsibilities or something, and it makes it really difficult. So if you can do 7 o'clock, I'd really appreciate it. And it's just the one day, and it's a really great workshop. But do remember, everybody needs to go in and sign up for one group or the other. And then if for some reason there's difficulty with the slot that's left over, then let me know. But hopefully, it'll all work out. And then if for some reason you haven't selected into a group, you'll get an email bugging you about it. Yeah, there'll be a little break between. So the first group will go through the simulation from 7 to 8, take a break. The second group will go through the simulation from 8 to 9, take a break, and then we'll come back together from 9 to 9:40 and have a big group discussion. So in preparation for the workshop, what you need to do before is to watch those videos as I asked, and then sign the consent. Now, just to let you know about the consent, it's not, everybody's required to show up for that day and for the workshop. What's voluntary is if you turn on and listen to the recording or not. It is not, and the reason that is because if there is anybody in the room that's ever heard voices, it's not recommended that you listen to a soundtrack of hearing voices. So you don't have to tell me, you don't have to tell anybody else in the group, you just wouldn't turn it on. You could put your earphones on and just go through the workstations, not listening to the recording. So the consent is just saying that you understand that you don't have to turn it on. If it's exhausting you, you can turn it off and still continue to participate in the workshop, because there's still value in taking part, even if you're finding it really hard to listen to the voices. And then the last piece in preparation for the workshop is to download the recording. So last year, some people just brought their laptops and clicked on the recording and tried to walk around with the laptop. For one thing, it's kind of clunky to walk around with your laptop. The other part is if the Wi-Fi goes in and out, then the recording stops. So it's best that you download the recording onto your phone or some other portable device, something that's easy to carry around, because you're going to listen to it while you are going around to the series of workstations. So make sure that you have your device fully charged, your phone or your iPad or what tablet you want to use. And make sure you have your own set of headphones. It doesn't work to share headphones either. It's really intended to be somewhat of a personal experience. And then after you download, just be sure that you can test it out to see that you can hear it, but don't listen to the recording before you get here. And then just asking that you complete the workshop within 24 hours, or complete the evaluation within 24 hours. Any questions about the workshop? All right, then one thing that I forgot to ask you about was a group agreement. I usually like to add that to our activity that we did early, but I forgot to add that as a question. So very briefly, and you can just kind of shout out things that are important to you, but I wanted to ask that what things would be helpful to you coming from me or your fellow students that would help you learn and feel safe to actively participate in the learning process in this class. So it might be something like listening attentively while someone is talking, or anything. So you can just shout them out and I'll add them to our group agreement. Anybody have anything that's important to them? I do. I posted today's. Yeah. So posting slides. Yeah, well, sometimes I'm working on them up until the last minute. Sometimes I can post, like the preliminary slides and then just know that they'll change, or would you rather just like the night before? Night before. Okay, yeah. I can post those. Yeah. So you want the PowerPoint rather than PDF. Okay. Anything else that would be helpful?
For videos that you may be showing us, can you please ensure that there may be like captions?
Definitely. Anything else?
I think, kind of going back to like keeping a safe environment, just remembering that some of these people are going through these mental illnesses, being sensitive to that.
Great. Anything else? One thing that I usually like to add, if it hasn't already been said, is assume goodwill. We're all doing our best, and if something comes out wrong or clunky, it's not necessarily because anybody intended any harm. So give the benefit of the doubt. All right. Yeah. Uh-huh. I did not plan on any review days, but I can think about that. I have lecture objectives for every lecture. I have objectives at the beginning, and usually when I bring them up at the end of the presentation as well, so that you can look at them again and see, do you feel like you can answer those questions? Because that's what the exams are going to be based on. And I also usually have a sample question or two at the end. Is that it? All right, so if anybody else wants to go in here and add something, you think about something later, please go ahead. Let me make sure that this is set for edit. So please go ahead and add to it if you like. And you can go into collaborations and enter that document as you see fit. So, if there are no further questions, we can get into today's content. So I usually like to allow for questions as I go along. If something strikes you as pertinent to what we're talking about, or since we're going to be working on these case study projects, if you have something to add about the person that you're working with, of course keeping things confidential about no names or identifying information, please do speak up and share about that. So we already know, based on our earlier discussion, that half of us are going to experience a lifetime disorder for ourselves personally at some point in our lives. And then I wanted to see what you think about these other disorders and what percentages you think these occur. Substance use disorders, schizophrenia, mood and anxiety disorders. We know like depression and anxiety was high on our list of words that first came to mind, so we know that's pretty common. So what I have is a slide in Menti that's interactive. You can use your laptop or your phone and go to menti.com, enter this number, and then select one of these two responses. Do these percentages, which of these percentages is correct based on the National Comorbidity Survey, which is a survey that tries to find out how common different disorders are in the US population. Is it 18% schizophrenia, 10% mood, 4% anxiety, 1% substance use, or 18% anxiety, 10% mood, 4% substance use, 1% schizophrenia? And we've got 23 responses so far, 28, 31. You guys know your stuff. Correct answer is 18% anxiety disorders. That is one of the most common things that people deal with. Second are mood disorders. So that could be depression, it could be bipolar disorder, 4% for substance use disorder. Although in the mentally ill population, it can be as high as 50% of people with mental illness that also have a substance use disorder. So that's a big difference between the general population and people with mental illness. And then schizophrenia is just 1%, so it's not a huge amount of people, probably about 1 million in the US. However, the World Health Organization has said schizophrenia is the most debilitating disorder that there is, even though it's only 1% of the population. So there we go. I think I will just jump ahead to the learning objectives. So the learning objectives for today include understanding the current beliefs about the origins of mental illness according to biological and psychosocial models. So this is in part for your own understanding, to know what you're looking at when you're working with someone, but also so you'll be able to teach your patients, because they want to know what's going on too. There are no black and white answers about what causes it, but you can tell people this is the best evidence that we have right now that this is what's contributing to your illness. So when you're learning about this and reading about it, also think about while you're going along, how can I explain this to a client? Then we're going to talk about the application of different theories of mental illness to nursing practice. How can we take that knowledge and what is our role in working with patients? Identifying the most common neurotransmitters involved in major mental illnesses. One of the most common theories of mental illness is cognitive theory by Beck and Ellis. So we're going to talk about one of the ways that people can practice skills in cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's the worksheet that I passed around to you guys. We'll do some practice with the ABCD method. And then we're going to talk about the mother of psychiatric nursing, Hildegard Peplau, and her interpersonal relations model of psychiatric nursing care. So let's start with talking about some historical beliefs about mental illness. So it was what people believed about the origins of mental illness, of course, that led to their decisions about what treatment would be delivered to people. So in 400 BC, Hippocrates was a Greek physician, believed that there were physiologic origins to mental illness, but just about nobody else bought into this. So really, we were more dealing with people who thought that things like being exposed to the full moon at birth or sleeping under the light of the full moon led to mental illness. And then we have learned that in the 1700s, the Salem witch trials, a lot of people who exhibited some of the behaviors that they associated with mental illness were labeled as witches. Now, not everybody was targeted in that way. Sometimes they just wanted somebody's property or things like that. There were a lot of other corrupt things going on in Salem, but it is believed that a portion of the people who were executed in the Salem witch trials had mental illness. So if our beliefs about mental illness are kind of demonic possession or, that sort of thing. What do you think was the response to that? What did we do to people with mental illness? Lock them up, ostracize them. They killed them in the case of the Salem witch trials. A lot of people were in jails or just kind of distanced from the community. So by the 1800s, there were some people advocating for the better treatment of people with mental illness, though they still kind of had these magical beliefs about where mental illness came from. And so while they weren't as barbaric as killing someone, they still had these methods where they wanted to try and drain the body of these ill humors or the demons. And so they came up with a variety of cathartic methods. So this is an image from a museum, and this depicts what it looked like when someone was given an ice bath to expel the demons from their bodies. So it was filled with water and ice, and then there's this cover with just enough of an opening for the person's head so they couldn't move or get out of it. And they were left there until they passed out. And this was found to calm people down, and they thought, this is how we're going to treat people with mental illness. Shock therapy was a precursor to what we have today, known as electroconvulsive therapy. It was found to also relax people. Pretty much that was what they were going for, just kind of getting people to be calm and quiet. And so they would induce seizures in a person, either using electricity or a chemical. And back then they didn't do the muscular block, so they would thrash around and sometimes fracture bones. But they found like a 30 to 80% improvement in symptoms as a result of shock therapy. They would also induce vomiting or diarrhea, just anything to get rid of body fluids. And then finally, bloodletting or bleeding was done. That's what you see in this picture. And they would do it until a person felt faint. Now, sometimes bloodletting would kill a person because they just drained them of too much blood. Sometimes a physician would do it, but barbers did it also. And that's why they have those red and white poles at barbershops, because that was a sign that you can get your bloodletting done here. So the beliefs about mental illness continue to evolve, and so in the late 1800s, there were kind of two schools of thought. Psychologists and psychologists believed that psychiatric disorders were purely disorders of the mind, no thought about any sort of biological processes. And the neurologists thought it's purely a biological process, no thought given to any sort of nurture that might be involved. But then, Emil Kraepelin, he was a psychiatrist, and even though he was taught to and trained to believe that there were no biological processes involved in mental illness, he was kind of dead set to find that there was. And in his work, he discovered the biologic process underlying Alzheimer's disease. He really wanted to find something to support schizophrenia's biologic basis. He wasn't able to do that, but it did kind of give more credence to the thought that there are biologic processes at work involved in mental illness. Once that happened and people started to come around more to that idea, biological treatments came to be more in favor. So some of these findings were just kind of serendipitous. When insulin was discovered in the 20s, they found that when people were given large doses of insulin, it also led to that calmness and relaxation that they were looking to induce in the psychiatric patients, and so they started using it for psychiatric patients as well and called it insulin coma therapy. They would try to get insulin levels down to, I think, like the 40s, and sustain that there for a while, and then give them glucose to bring them back. So in some cases, they were unsuccessful in reviving the person after having the blood sugar level so low for an extended period of time. So there were some deaths as a result of that, but when it worked, and when they were able to revive them, they found it to be a fairly effective treatment. Then there were some improvements in electroconvulsive therapy. That was, it was safer and there were less deaths, but patients still suffered fractures and things. They also had severe memory loss as a result because they were such high doses of electricity, or the seizures went for so long. So they would get this 2 to 3 times a week, usually 6 to 10 weeks, for patients that were severely psychotic, manic, or suicidal, and so the remission rates were from 30 to 80% for ECT. And if the person were unresponsive to either one of these, they might get both. Then there was the lobotomy that was developed, and there was a Portuguese psychiatrist who, after learning of an Irish laborer who, in an unfortunate accident when he was working, got an iron bar embedded in his skull, and it ended up removing part of his frontal lobe, he noticed that his personality completely changed. Now, he went from being a really pleasant, well-liked guy to being kind of a nasty person, and for some reason, the doctor thought that we can take out this part of the brain and the opposite will happen. So he developed this procedure, which was a regular surgical in the OR kind of procedure. And so you can imagine all the expense that will go along with that type of procedure. So the lobotomy didn't become really popular until this doctor, Walter Freeman, developed what became known as the ice pick lobotomy. And so rather than it being an in the OR procedure, he could do it in, a chair, in an office, and he would take the device, put it in the intraorbital area, tap it in, and then just swish it back and forth to remove part of the frontal lobe. So when he did this, when he started this, he was really committed to it. He went around, he was kind of like going around the circuit, spreading the word about his procedure. He did about 3,500 of them himself and trained other people to do them in psychiatric hospitals until it went, I think it reached its peak at about 20,000 people. Rosemary Kennedy, President John Kennedy's sister, underwent one of these procedures, and it left her in a really childlike state. This man was a resident at the time Walter Freeman worked, and I just was struck in hearing him give an interview on NPR when he talked about seeing Dr. Freeman at work. He said, I remember he was relaxed and didn't have any qualms about it, and he just said, how can a man be relaxed just going blindly into a brain? And then they talked about how people were after these. They said some improved, some stayed the same, and then some ended up quite a bit worse. They said something was missing, emotions, I would say. If you were to converse with someone, there's always emotion with it. Just take all of your emotion out of the conversation with somebody, and that's what's left. That's what it was like when someone would come back from a lobotomy. And has anybody heard of or seen the movie One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest? That was like one of the ways that the media kind of jumped in there and helped to turn public opinion against lobotomy. phlebotomies. And then with the public opinion changing, as well as the development of this drug, Thorazine, in the 1950s, it was seen as no longer acceptable, and Thorazine was seen as a better way of going about it. So Thorazine is the first antipsychotic drug that was developed. It was originally developed as an anesthetic agent, and then, of course, one of those serendipitous findings, they found that it makes people pretty relaxed, so let's try it with psych patients, and then they started using it for psychiatric treatment as well. So these are just some images of Walter Freeman doing his procedure. This is what some of the kids looked like after he'd had the procedure. He would have, several people observing, learning how to do the procedure, and that's kind of one of those horrific pictures. So if you wanted to listen to, see that story or listen to interviews of people who underwent the procedures, you can go to this link. Has anybody seen this Netflix documentary, Three Identical Strangers? No? Somebody did. What do you remember about it?
I remember that even though they all kind of, no, it's actually, they were all like, they basically were triplets, but they were all raised in different environments, and ultimately like ended up kind of changing their course of life, which brings in the whole like nature.
Right. So this all started, it's really interesting the way they work it up in the video, because it starts out with just triplets being split up and going to different homes, but and sorry to give a spoiler if anybody wanted to watch it, but the big reveal in this is that it was all by design. There was a psychologist who had a study, and he wanted to test that nature versus nurture theory, and they intentionally separated twins and triplets and put them into different homes to see how they developed over time. And so people would go to the homes and evaluate them every year, and the triplets talk about that. Now, for two of the brothers, they went into normal, loving homes, developed into well-adjusted adults, and one of them, he developed bipolar disorder, and he ended up committing suicide after they were adults. So it is, if anybody is working with someone with bipolar disorder and you're looking for your first-hand account of someone with a mental illness, this might be a good documentary to watch. Sad and very interesting. So those twin and triplet studies, ethical, non-ethical studies, are how we've learned a lot of what we've learned about mental illness. And that led to our current beliefs about etiology in about the late 70s. So we now believe that there are both biological and psychosocial factors that influence outcomes of health and illness. Now, if we were to be able to say without a doubt, X leads to schizophrenia or depression, we'd have to set up a study in that way, like the doctor did with the three triplets. That's not ethical, so we're usually left trying to figure out what to make or how mental illness is going to be treated or what causes it through these correlational studies, or just kind of following people over time to see what happens as a result of having a mental illness. So some of the things that have been published in the literature about biological influences are any number of things. The Human Genome Project was thought to, kind of be the big thing that we were all waiting for, that was going to explain mental illness and lead to treatments. We don't have any of those treatments yet that are gene-based, because even though they might find in someone with a mental illness a gene defect in one part of their gene sequence or abnormalities in a chromosome, it's not just one area, and this person with bipolar disorder might look very different from this person with bipolar disorder. So there's just no consistency between it. And also it's kind of unknown whether it happened, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the disorder what led to these abnormalities, or did the abnormalities lead to the disorder? There are a number of infections that have been shown to be associated with disorders, like HIV, related dementia. There has been shown that OCD in certain people has been linked to infections in the womb. Physical trauma can lead to psychiatric symptoms or illness. So there are nursing homes, that cater to people with traumatic brain injury, because that can change your personality as well as your impulse control and behavior. And we just talked about what the effect of those lobotomies were on people's personalities. Repeated psychological trauma is something that's come out more in the last decade or two. That's really been interesting. There is a research team that has published about adverse childhood events, ACEs. Has anybody come across that term yet? If you haven't, we're going to be talking more about that. So their research has shown that the higher the number of adverse childhood events that people have had, so if they've had 4 or more, they're more likely to have any number of diseases or disorders as a result of that. And one thing that I found really interesting was that even people with no family history of mental disorder, if they have 4 or more of those adverse childhood events, they're more likely to experience psychosis, which is hearing voices or having delusional thoughts. And usually, I was surprised by that when it came out in the research. Nutritional deficiencies has been linked to a number of things: depression, for one, dementia also, and then hormonal changes, toxins like exposure to lead. So one of the first things that people do if it's a new experience of symptoms for somebody, the first thing a doctor or a provider should do is rule out a medical condition or one of these things having occurred before making a diagnosis of a mental disorder. So we talked about the chicken and the egg conundrum. This is another chicken or egg conundrum that we're not sure about. So this is the brain scan of 2 twins. One has schizophrenia on this side, and this twin does not have schizophrenia. So this is an image of the lateral ventricles that the arrows are pointing to. What are you seeing that's different between these 2 twins? Yes, so this one's larger. So what does that tell you about the surrounding tissue? It's less. There's less. There's less tissue here than here. So it could be from atrophy. Maybe that was an abnormality that started at birth. But there's also research that's shown that people who have untreated psychosis for a long period of time, their brain atrophies. So this could be something that occurred after the diagnosis had already been made. Another hypothesis or belief about schizophrenia was the dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia, and that came out in about the 60s. And it came out, it was produced by a physician in the Netherlands who, in observing people who were using stimulant drugs, the experience that they had with experiencing hallucinations. So they were seeing things and having what we call positive symptoms of schizophrenia. But the problem with this hypothesis is that people who have schizophrenia also have what we call negative symptoms, that you'll hear more about next week. And people who are using drugs like cocaine or other derivatives of that don't experience those negative symptoms like social withdrawal and lack of attention to ADLs and that sort of thing. Some of the commonly discussed neurotransmitters are listed here. I won't go into great detail because we're going to talk about the drugs as we go along with the different disorders. But these are the ones that are most likely to be addressed by the drugs that you're going to see given in your clinical settings. So when you are looking at antipsychotics drugs for people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or their bipolar disorder has some psychotic features, they're going to have drugs that are affecting dopamine. For people with depression or anxiety disorders, they're going to have drugs that are affecting norepinephrine and serotonin. For people with anxiety disorders, their drugs are going to affect GABA. And it's also good to know that alcohol affects GABA as well. So when we talk about substance use disorders and withdrawal from alcohol, when people are taking drugs like benzodiazepines or they're drinking heavily every day, their GABA production goes down. So when they take away alcohol or those benzodiazepine drugs, they experience all these withdrawal symptoms because their brain stopped producing GABA. All right, so we've got about 20 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about some psychological theories of mental illness, and we're going to go through them fairly quickly. So we're just going to talk briefly about what the underlying belief is of the theory, and then what we can do as, I'm going to ask you guys, what we can do as nurses to support the patient's recovery or improvement as a result of that theory. So we all know who Freud is. Do you guys remember anything about his theories? They are a little weird, some of them, but there are parts of it that are still underlying our therapeutic practices that we still use today. So what are the ones that we can use? So we don't have to worry about the part about, penis envy and all that kind of weird stuff. But what's the part that we use in talk therapy? So that's going to be the next one. Freud started that with the child development. People go through stages of development. Our next theorist used that more as the basis of psychological disorders. But for Freud, he said that the conflicts that we experience have to do with, like that dissonance between the wants of the id and the superego, but also just that there are these conflicts, things that we experience in childhood that we have little or no awareness of. So the goal then is to bring the subconscious into the conscious, and doing that through talk therapy. So what can we do as nurses to support that? Let the patient talk, yeah. That's the best place to start. Listen to them, ask questions that are open-ended, allow them to talk about their feelings and bring those thoughts into the conscious. Have you ever had the experience of, like, there's something you've been struggling to figure out, and then you're trying to explain it to somebody to ask them for their help, and then you figure it out on your own? That can be the case for some people also. Or just to have the chance to share their feelings if they don't have other people to talk to. We can also reinforce teaching of whatever they're learning in their therapy. Now, this is a picture of Erik Erikson. He was actually a student of Freud, and so he took Freud's initial theories of development that went just to about adolescence, and he took it all the way through the lifespan. And so he thought that psychopathology occurs if you don't master a stage of development, and if you can't master that stage, you can't progress to the next stage, so you get kind of stuck there. So if that is the problem, what can we do as nurses to support patients based on this theory? Do you want to try? Absolutely, master those, we can help them master the skills. So we would want to know about what those stages of development are and what the goals are at each stage. So if we have a patient who is in stage 3, ages 3 to 6, initiative versus guilt, let's say they have kind of a helicopter parent who won't let them venture out to do pretty much anything. You know, they want to get everything for them, want to do everything for them. What might you do, coaching a parent, to help the child to reach the goals of this stage? Totally, yeah. I always beat myself up, you know, I'm remarried now, but there was a period of time where I was just raising my daughter alone, and it always seemed like we were, you know, just going from one activity to the next, and I wasn't allowing her to do things like, you know, spill something or, you know, make a mess so she could learn things on her own. And I wish I could go back and do that, because I think I delayed her a little bit in her development because I was just trying to hold everything together so I didn't lose any time anywhere. So just study up on those stages of development, because they do seem to be pretty accurate when you review what each stage is about. The next theory is one of my favorites, not just because I like his hair in this picture. It's behavioral or social learning theory. One of the reasons this is near and dear to my own heart is because I am someone who is super sensitive, drives my family crazy, but I was always really emotional about things. And learning about this theory helped me to kind of take myself out of all of that emotion and just focus on behaviors. So B.F. Skinner thought that all behavior is learned. Nothing comes from past experiences. It's just, if you did something and you got this response, that either made you want to repeat the behavior or to avoid doing the behavior again in the future. So the nursing application then is to work to replace maladaptive behaviors with healthier or socially acceptable ones. Usually it's used with children or people with developmental disabilities. But how do you think we can support people in achieving their goals based on this theory?
Kind of supporting them and letting them know that they can make the right decisions. They don't have to repeat the same action.
Mm-hmm. Great. So giving them that kind of permission to have a different behavior, preparing them to know what some behavioral alternatives are, keeping in mind that we might be working with children or people with developmental delays. We want to keep it fairly simple with what the options are. So let's say I've got a child who maybe has oppositional defiant disorder, which just means they kind of are really very willful and don't want to do what their parents tell them to. So let's say this kid needs to learn how to pick up their toys at the end of the day. So what kind of contingency might we set up to ensure that the kid goes through with their end of the deal? Rewards, yeah. So behavioral theory is all about setting up those rewards, those consequences, so that we can set up the environment that the person will repeat the behaviors we want, and the behaviors we don't want will be extinguished. All right, so one thing, the next unity on this. So the question here is, rank these from what you think is the worst thing that could ever happen to the least. So out of these 4 things, you loan your sibling your money for rent, and then you see them with something new and expensive. A high school rival asks you at your reunion if you've put on weight. A car cuts you off on the freeway, just barely missing you, and then they honk at you. And then the 4th, the person behind you at a movie theater is talking. Whatever you think. Just do it based on whatever your belief would be. Worst to least worst. What would piss you off the most at the top? All right, so you can keep selecting while we talk. So it's clear that we're not all picking the same thing. If we say, this event happened, you loan your sibling money and they buy something really expensive. If somebody asked you why you were upset about that, what would you say? They should do more, and the reason why you think that was worse than any of the other things? Okay, so if the premise behind cognitive theory is that it's not an event that causes you to feel a certain way, it's what you feel about it. So if it were the event or the thing, we'd probably all have ranked these exactly the same, and it would all be lined up, and there would have been no switching around as we went through here. But we all think about these in different ways. Like, for me, this probably would have been my number 1. Because I think, I was a runner in high school, and I think they were all secretly waiting for me to blow up after I got out of school. So I take offense to those. But we're all going to think differently about those things because of our own value systems or, our experiences. I had a friend in high school who used to always make comments to me about my size, and her mom used to too. So I'm just sensitive about that. So we're all going to be sensitive about different things in different ways. So if the belief is that it's our thoughts and our perceptions about things that are leading to our negative thoughts and feelings, then the goal for therapy is to change how we're thinking about those things so that we can start to feel better. So the worksheets that you have are homework sheets that we are often assigned in cognitive therapy. People often keep journals to track their thoughts, and then every time they might experience a negative thought or one that's causing them distress, they would work through this ABCD method. The ABCD method asks people to identify the activating event that caused the negative feelings, and then B is the underlying belief. So for those examples that we just looked at, my underlying belief in a high school rival telling me that, or asking me if I've gained weight is, they're being really mean, they're trying to insult me.